Hello and welcome back to P&B Kids Stories. It's been a long time since we've done a video. I'm going to share a story about the oldest student who learned how to read. This book is all about Mary Walker, and she learned how to read at 116. Isn't that really old to learn? Anyways, let's get on with the story. Whenever young Mary was tired, she would shield her eyes from the sun and watch the swallow-tailed kites dip and soar above the trees. That must be what it's like to be free, she thought. But Mary didn't watch. Mary didn't watch for long. Even only at 8 years, she knew the first rule of the Union Springs, Alabama plantation lived on: keep working. She knew the second rule: slaves should not be taught to read, write, or do anything that might help them learn to do so. Mary didn't stop working. She didn't learn to read either, but at the end of each long day, picking cotton, totting water to Papa and the other slave who chopped the wood for train tracks, or helping Mama clean the big house, which would lie in her little bed next to the crumbling fireplace, and think about those birds. When I'm free, I'll go where I want and rest when I want, and I'll learn to read too. When she was 15, Mary and her mother's brothers and sisters were free, finally. The Emancipation Proclamation said so. What it didn't say was how a family with nothing except the tattered garments and on their backs would find food, clothes, or a place to sleep. Mary's father had died, and the family was on its own. Freedom road to Freedom Road. Across fields like through woods, ex-slaves surged through the waves, crashing to shore. Now they were free. Every road was Freedom Road. Many headed north and west, and every way which way, searching for long-lost family members or simply experiencing the wonder of being free. Others, like Mary, chose to stay in the South. An organization called Freedmen's Bureau helped those who stayed to find shelter on abandoned, confident land. Mary and her family settled in one-room cabin, and for the next few years, she worked alongside her mum to help feed her siblings 7 days a week. She churned butter, cleaned houses, and cared for other folks' children. The hours were long, and if Mary was thirsty or hungry to use the outhouse, she had to wait until she got home. At the weekends, she would offer her mum the one lonely quarter she had earned. One day, Mary met a group of evangelists on the roadside. A woman with soft wrinkles in her kindly face placed a big, beautiful Bible in Mary's hands and told her, "Your civil rights are in these pages." Mary didn't know what civil rights were. She only knew that top to bottom, from front to back, that the book was filled with words. "I'm going to read those words," she vowed, "but not today. Today, there was work to be done. And tomorrow too." When Mary got married, she and her husband worked as sharecroppers renting someone else's house, using someone else's tools, and planting someone else's seed to farm land they would never own. After they harvest the crops, almost all the money they earned went to pay for the housing, tools, and seed costs. Mary dipped a pen into an inkwell and made a mark beside it. Not a letter, not a name, just a mark. It was the best she could do. One day, Mary's husband died. She got married again, and the second son was born. And then the third, Mary made marks for these sons too. Now she had 3 growing boys, more money. That's what we need Mary for. But the only other jobs available to black women were as maids or nannies or cooks. The hours were long, with only half a day off on Saturdays, like sharecropping. They didn't pay much, Mary said. Words would have to wait. For the next 4 decades, Mary sharecropped and did odd jobs to help support her family. In 1917, Mary's family moved to the little city of Shanatuku in Tennessee. It was the year of Chantagu's Great Flood. The story was all in the newspapers, but Mary could only study the pictures to understand what happened because she had never learned to read. But by now, Mary was 68 and too old to sharecrop, but she continued to work, cooking, cleaning, and babysitting. She also fried fish, baked cakes, and sold sandwiches to raise money for her church. On Sunday, she would sit in the congregation, and as the preacher spoke, she would clutch her family Bible, the Bible she still couldn't read. When Mary was well past 90, she and her husband sat in their creaky rockers while one or another of the sons read to them. After the 2 younger boys died, the eldest read. Then Mary's husband died. Several years later, the eldest son died too. He was 94. Mary had outlived her entire family. She was 114 years old and alone. Can't read, she said, can't write. I don't know anything. Mary stood at the window of her retirement home and gazed down at the world below. Words were everywhere, on billboards, on buildings, on store windows, and trucks. She said all this time, she thought, and they still look like little squiggles. Mary heard about a new reading class held in her building. Mary pursed her lips. No more waiting, she decided. Time to learn. Out of her apartment, into an elevator, and down the lobby she went. When the elevator doors sprang open, Mary saw people sitting under a sign with a picture of an open book. She could not read the words. A neighbour walked up to her. "That's a reading class, Miss Mary. Can I help you over?" Mary shook her head, and then she gripped her gate, lifted her chin, and walked straight to that sign. For the next year and more, and Mary put everything she had into learning to read. It wasn't easy after all. She was the oldest student in the class, and probably the entire country. Could someone her age learn to read? She didn't know, but by God, she was going to try. She studied the alphabet until her eyes watered. She memorized the sounds each letter made and practiced writing her name so many times that her fingers cramped. She learned to recognize sight words, then challenged herself to make short sentences with them. She studied and studied until books on pages and letters on words swirled in her head while she slept. hard work paid off. She could read. Isn't that amazing? Her hard work paid off because she worked hard and then she accomplished her dream. Word of her accomplishment traveled and spread, and people everywhere celebrated with her. And Chattanooga's mayor, newspaper, and journalists across the country, and a man from the U.S. Department of Education who said, "Mrs. Mary Walker, I pronounce you the nation's oldest student," all shared her joy. So Mary felt complete. She still missed her sons, but whenever she was lonely, she read from her book, her Bible, or looked out her window and read the words in the streets below. From then on, Chattanooga's mayor honored Mary's achievement with yearly birthday parties. In 1966, President Lyndon B. Johnson sent well wishes on Mary's 118th birthday, and in 1969, President Richard Nixon did the same. Mary was now 121 years old. Mary received many gifts over the years: a radio, a sofa, her very first television, and a new Bible, the key to the city, and perfume and champagne from Canadian Mounties. She also received something that brought back those long days in Alabama cotton fields. Her first airplane ride, from the cockpit, then a horse and a buggy ride, she joked. But she knew it was of long. Mary decided that flying was a lot like reading. They both made a body feel as free as a bird. Each year before her birthday celebration came to an end, someone would whisper, "Let's listen to Mary." In Miss Mary, the shuffling of movement would fade away until not a sound was heard. Then Mary would stand on her old legs, clear and old throat, and read from her Bible or her schoolbook in a voice that was clear and strong. When she finished, she would gently close her eyes, close her book, and say, "You're never too old to learn." And that's all about Mary Walker.